The rain hammered against the tall windows of Thornfield Palace as Lady Eleanor stood in the grand marble hallway, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the handle of her leather suitcase. The afternoon had turned dark, matching the heavy feeling in her chest. She had made her decision and nothing would change her mind now. After 15 years as the Queen Consort of Valdoria, she was finally leaving. The palace staff moved quietly around her, their eyes lowered as they always did in her presence. But today their silence felt different. It felt like judgment. Eleanor could sense the whispers that would follow her departure, the scandal that would rock the kingdom. She did not care anymore. The golden cage she had lived in for so long had become suffocating, and she needed to breathe again. Her personal maid, Martha, had packed her belongings with tears streaming down her weathered face. The old woman had served Eleanor since the day she arrived at the palace as a young bride, full of dreams and hope. Now those dreams lay shattered like the antique vase King Alexander had thrown against the wall during their argument last night. The pieces were still there, swept into a corner, waiting for someone to clean up the mess. Just like their marriage, Eleanor adjusted her dark coat and pulled the suitcase closer. The wheels made a soft clicking sound against the polished floor as she moved toward the main entrance. Her heart pounded with each step. She had called for her car to be brought around to the front. In 20 minutes, she would be gone from this place forever. She would go to her sister's cottage in the countryside, somewhere simple and quiet where no one would recognize her face from newspaper covers and television broadcasts. The massive oak doors of the palace stood before her now, carved with the royal crest of Valdoria. How many times had she walked through these doors? Thousands, perhaps, each time returning to a place that had never truly felt like home. She reached for the brass handle, her fingers just inches away from freedom. Lady Eleanor. The voice was firm and commanding, cutting through the silence like a blade. She froze. Her hand dropped to her side. Slowly, she turned to see Captain James Thornton, the head of the Royal Guard, standing 10 feet behind her. He was a tall man with broad shoulders, his uniform perfectly pressed, medals gleaming on his chest. His face was stern, the face of a soldier who had seen too much and said too little. "Captain Thornton," Eleanor replied, keeping her voice steady, "I am leaving. Please do not try to stop me." The captain took 3 measured steps forward, his boots echoing in the vast hallway. "I cannot allow you to leave the palace, Your Majesty." Eleanor felt anger rising in her throat. "I am not a prisoner here. I have every right to leave." "Under normal circumstances, yes," Captain Thornton said, his gray eyes never leaving hers. "But these are not normal circumstances." "What are you talking about?" Eleanor demanded. She could feel her composure beginning to crack. All she wanted was to walk out that door and never look back. The captain glanced over his shoulder, checking to make sure they were alone. The other guards had moved to different positions, giving them privacy, but remaining close enough to intervene if necessary. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, almost gentle. "There has been a situation, Your Majesty. King Alexander has issued orders. No one is to leave or enter the palace until further notice. This includes you." Eleanor laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Of course he has."
"He cannot control me, so he locks the doors."
"How very typical." "This is not about your personal situation," Captain Thornton said, taking another step closer. "There is a security concern. A credible threat has been made against the royal family. Until we can assess and neutralize this threat, the palace is on lockdown." For a moment, Eleanor's anger wavered. A threat? What kind of threat? But then she remembered all the times Alexander had manipulated her, all the lies he had told to keep her compliant and silent. "This was just another one of his games. I do not believe you," she said coldly. "This is my husband's doing. He wants to humiliate me one last time." Captain Thornton's expression did not change. "Believe what you wish, Your Majesty. But I have my orders and I will not disobey them. I must ask you to step away from the door and return to your chambers." Eleanor's eyes flashed with defiance. "And if I refuse?" The captain's jaw tightened. This was clearly difficult for him, but his duty was absolute. "Then I will be forced to physically prevent your departure." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Eleanor stared at the man who had protected her for years, who had walked 3 steps behind her at every public event, who had stood guard outside her rooms during countless sleepless nights. She had always seen him as just another part of the palace machinery, another soldier following orders. But now, looking into his eyes, she saw something unexpected. Conflict. He did not want to do this. You would really stop me? She asked quietly. You would put your hands on the Queen Consort of Valdoria. I would do what is necessary to protect you, he replied, even if that means protecting you from yourself. Eleanor felt tears threatening, but she blinked them back. She would not cry in front of him. She would not show weakness. She lifted her chin and tightened her grip on her suitcase. I am leaving, Captain. Move aside. She took one step toward the door, then another. Captain Thornton did not move, but she could see his muscles tensing, preparing for action. The air between them crackled with tension. When she was close enough to touch the door handle again, it happened. Captain Thornton's hand shot out and grabbed the handle of her suitcase. His grip was firm and unyielding. Please, Your Majesty, he said, his voice strained. Do not make this harder than it needs to be. Eleanor pulled on the suitcase, but the captain held fast. They stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills, the Queen Consort and her guard both refusing to give ground. Behind them, Eleanor could hear footsteps. More guards were coming. Soon there would be witnesses to this humiliating scene. Let go of my suitcase, Eleanor said through gritted teeth. Return to your chambers, Captain Thornton replied, his voice equally tight. The footsteps grew louder. Eleanor could see shadows moving in the corridors. In seconds, the entire palace would know what was happening. The gossip would spread like wildfire. The Queen Consort, stopped at the door by her own guard, trying to flee the palace like a common criminal. Eleanor's mind raced. How had it come to this? How had her life, which had once seemed so full of promise and purpose, collapsed into this moment of absolute desperation? She thought of her wedding day, the crowds cheering, the bells ringing across the capital city. She thought of the promises Alexander had made to her, the future they were supposed to build together. All lies, all broken promises. She looked into Captain Thornton's eyes one more time and saw something that surprised her. Pity. He pitied her. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This man, this soldier who had sworn to serve her, looked at her with pity. Eleanor released her grip on the suitcase and stepped back. Her shoulders sagged with defeat. Fine, she whispered. You win. But even as she spoke those words, Eleanor knew this was not over. Not by a long way. If she could not leave today, she would find another way. She would wait, she would plan, and she would escape this golden prison, no matter what it took. Eleanor walked slowly back through the palace corridors, her footsteps echoing against the cold marble floors. Captain Thornton followed at a respectful distance, carrying her suitcase. She refused to look at him, refused to acknowledge his presence. The humiliation burned through her like fire, making her cheeks flush and her hands shake with suppressed rage. When they reached her private chambers, she stopped at the door and held out her hand without turning around. My suitcase, Captain. He placed it carefully in her outstretched hand. Your Majesty, I truly am sorry. If there were any other way up, there's nothing more to say. Eleanor interrupted, her voice ice cold. You have done your duty. You may leave now. She heard him hesitate, heard the soft sound of his boots shifting on the floor. For a moment, she thought he might try to explain further, to justify his actions. But instead he simply said, I will post guards at both ends of this corridor. For your protection. Eleanor laughed bitterly. You mean to ensure I do not try to escape again? Call it what it is, Captain. I am a prisoner. She did not wait for his response. She opened the door to her chambers and stepped inside, closing it firmly behind her. Only when she heard his footsteps retreating did she allow herself to lean against the door, her legs suddenly weak beneath her. Martha appeared from the sitting room, her face pale with worry. My lady, what happened? Why are you back? Eleanor could not answer. She stumbled to the nearest chair and collapsed into it, dropping the suitcase beside her. The tears she had been holding back finally came, hot and bitter, streaming down her face. Martha rushed to her side, kneeling down and taking Eleanor's hands in her own weathered ones. There, my dear, Martha murmured, using the familiar terms she had used when Eleanor was younger. Tell me what happened. Between broken sobs, Eleanor explained everything. The guard blocking her way, the suitcase, the claim about a security threat. Martha listened quietly, her expression growing more troubled with each word. Perhaps there really is a threat, Martha suggested carefully. These are dangerous times. There have been protests in the capital, unhappy people. It is just another one of Alexander's manipulations, Eleanor said angrily, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. He cannot stand the thought of me leaving him. He would rather see me miserable than free. Martha stood slowly, her old knees creaking. She moved to the window and looked out at the palace grounds. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained gray and threatening. My lady, I have served in this palace for 40 years. I have seen many things, heard many secrets, and I can tell you this. There are more dangerous games being played here than you realize. Eleanor looked up at her maid, surprised by the serious tone in her voice. What do you mean? Martha turned from the window, her face troubled. There are rumors, my lady. Talk among the servants. Things are not well in the kingdom. The king's advisors are divided. There is talk of plots and conspiracies. Some say there are people who want to overthrow the monarchy entirely. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. You think the threat is real? I think the palace is full of secrets, Martha said quietly. And not all of them belong to the king. Before Eleanor could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. Martha moved to answer it, but Eleanor held up her hand. Leave it. I am not receiving visitors. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Then a voice called through the door. Lady Eleanor, it is Lord William Ashford. I must speak with you immediately. Eleanor's breath caught. Lord Ashford was the king's chief advisor, a cunning man with sharp eyes and sharper ambitions. She had never liked him, never trusted him, but his presence here meant something important was happening. Enter, she called, straightening in her chair and quickly wiping away the last traces of her tears. The door opened and Lord Ashford stepped inside. He was a thin man in his 50s, dressed impeccably in a dark suit, his silver hair perfectly combed. His eyes swept the room, taking in everything before settling on Eleanor. Your Majesty, he said with a slight bow, forgive the intrusion. I understand there was an incident at the main entrance. News travels fast in this palace, Eleanor said coolly. I suppose the entire staff is gossiping about it now. The staff knows only what they saw, Lord Ashford replied. But I know the truth. You were attempting to leave. Eleanor lifted her chin defiantly. I have that right. Under normal circumstances, yes, Lord Ashford said, echoing Captain Thornton's earlier words. He moved further into the room, his hands clasped behind his back. But I am afraid these circumstances are far from normal. May I speak freely? Eleanor gestured to a chair across from her. It seems I have nothing but time now. Lord Ashford sat down, his movements precise and calculated. He studied Eleanor for a long moment before speaking. Your Majesty, I am going to tell you something that very few people know. What I am about to share could put both of us in danger, but I believe you deserve to know the truth. Eleanor felt her heart rate quicken. Martha had moved to stand beside her chair, a protective presence. 2 days ago, Lord Ashford continued, we received intelligence about a plot to assassinate members of the royal family. The threat is credible and imminent. We have arrested 3 suspects, but we believe there are more conspirators still at large, possibly within the palace itself. Eleanor's mouth went dry. Within the palace? You mean servants, guards? We do not know yet, Lord Ashford admitted. That is why the king ordered the lockdown. Everyone must remain in place while we investigate. No one can leave and no one can enter. It is for your safety, Your Majesty. Eleanor's mind reeled. Could this be true? Or was it an elaborate lie designed to keep her trapped? She looked at Lord Ashford's face, searching for any sign of deception, but his expression was grave and sincere. If this is true, Eleanor said slowly, then why did no one tell me before? Why did I have to learn about it from Captain Thornton at the door, like a common criminal being stopped from fleeing? Lord Ashford's lips pressed into a thin line. The king believed it was better if you did not know. He thought you would be frightened, that you would worry unnecessarily. So he decided for me, Eleanor said bitterly, as he always does. He treats me like a child who cannot handle the truth. His Majesty loves you, Lord Ashford said quietly, even if his methods are sometimes misguided. Eleanor laughed harshly. Love, is that what you call it? He does not love me, Lord Ashford. He loves the idea of me, the image we present to the public. But the real me? The woman with thoughts and feelings and dreams of her own, he has never cared about her. Lord Ashford looked uncomfortable. Your Majesty, I did not come here to discuss your marriage. I came to inform you of the danger and to ask for your cooperation. Please stay in your chambers. Do not attempt to leave again. The situation is serious. Eleanor stood, forcing Lord Ashford to stand as well. "You may tell the king that I will cooperate with the lockdown. Not because he commands it, but because I am not foolish enough to ignore a genuine threat. But when this is over, when these conspirators are caught, I will leave this palace, and there will be no guard or advisor or king who can stop me." Lord Ashford bowed slightly. "I will convey your message, Your Majesty." He turned to leave, but Eleanor called out to him. "Lord Ashford? One more thing. How long? How long must we remain locked in this palace?" He paused at the door, his hand on the handle. "I do not know, Your Majesty. Days, perhaps. Maybe weeks. It depends on how quickly we can root out the conspiracy." After he left, Eleanor sank back into her chair, feeling utterly exhausted. Martha brought her a cup of tea, but Eleanor's hands shook too much to hold it steady. "What am I going to do?" she whispered. "What if I am trapped here forever?" Martha knelt beside her again, taking the cup from her trembling hands. "You are stronger than you know, my lady. You have survived 15 years in this palace. You can survive a few more days." But as Eleanor looked out the window at the darkening sky, she wondered if Martha was right. How much more could she endure before she broke completely? 3 days had passed since Eleanor's failed attempt to leave the palace. 3 long days of confinement in her chambers, watching the hours crawl by like wounded animals. The lockdown continued with no end in sight. Meals were brought to her door by nervous servants who would not meet her eyes. Martha stayed close, trying to keep her spirits up with stories and gossip from the kitchen. But even the old woman's cheerfulness was beginning to fade. On the morning of the 4th day, Eleanor woke to the sound of raised voices in the corridor outside her chambers. She sat up quickly, her heart pounding. Martha rushed to the door, pressing her ear against it to listen. "What is it?" Eleanor asked, climbing out of bed and reaching for her robe. "Guards arguing," Martha whispered back. "I cannot make out the words, but they sound angry." Eleanor moved to join Martha at the door just as the voices suddenly stopped. There was a moment of tense silence, then footsteps hurrying away. Eleanor was about to step back when the door burst open without warning. King Alexander stood in the doorway, his face flushed with anger, his hair disheveled. He looked as if he had not slept in days. Behind him, Captain Thornton hovered uncertainly, clearly uncomfortable with the king's forceful entrance. "Leave us," Alexander commanded, gesturing at Martha and the captain. Martha looked at Eleanor, silently asking if she should stay. Eleanor gave a small nod, and the old woman reluctantly left the room. Captain Thornton closed the door behind them, leaving Eleanor alone with her husband for the first time since their terrible argument. "You tried to leave me," Alexander said, his voice low and dangerous. "You packed your bags and tried to walk out of this palace like I meant nothing to you." Eleanor pulled her robe tighter around herself. "I did not come here to discuss this with you now." "When then?" Alexander shouted, making her flinch. "When were you planning to tell me you wanted to leave? Or were you just going to disappear one day without a word?" "I left you a letter," Eleanor said quietly. "It explained everything." Alexander laughed bitterly, pulling a crumpled piece of paper from his jacket pocket. He threw it on the floor between them. This cold formal note that reads like a business transaction? 15 years of marriage, and this is all I deserve." Eleanor stared at the letter lying on the floor, the words she had labored over for hours, trying to explain the unexplainable. "What did you expect? A passionate declaration? We have not had a real conversation in months. We barely speak anymore unless there are cameras watching. Because you shut me out." Alexander ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "Every time I try to reach you, you pull away. You look at me like I'm a stranger." "You are a stranger," Eleanor said softly. "The man I married, the man I thought I knew, he disappeared years ago. You became someone else, someone cold and distant and cruel." Alexander's face crumpled. For a moment he looked like he might cry, but he caught himself. Kings do not cry, especially not in front of their wives. "I never meant to hurt you. Everything I did, every decision I made, I thought I was doing what was best for the kingdom, for us." "You thought wrong," Eleanor said. She moved to the window, unable to look at him anymore. "You chose duty over love. You chose the crown over me. And now you are surprised that I want to leave?" There was a long silence. Eleanor could hear Alexander breathing heavily behind her, wrestling with emotions he had kept buried for so long. When he finally spoke again, his voice was different, softer, almost broken. "Is there someone else?" Eleanor spun around, shocked. "What? Is that why you want to leave? Have you found someone who makes you happy?" Alexander's eyes were red-rimmed, his jaw clenched. I have seen the way you look at oh. Stop, Eleanor interrupted sharply. Do not finish that sentence. There is no one else. There has never been anyone else. I took my vows seriously even when you clearly did not. I never betrayed you, Alexander said hotly. I have always been faithful. Betrayal is not just about affairs, Eleanor shot back. You betrayed me every time you dismissed my opinions in front of your advisors. Every time you made decisions about our life without consulting me. Every time you treated me like a decoration instead of a partner. Alexander stumbled backward as if she had struck him. He sank into a chair, his head in his hands. I did not know. I thought you were happy. You always smiled for the cameras, always said the right things. I am very good at pretending, Eleanor said quietly. I have had 15 years of practice. They sat in heavy silence, the weight of unspoken truths pressing down on them. Eleanor felt exhausted, emotionally drained. Part of her wanted to comfort him, to reach out and touch his shoulder the way she used to when they first married. But another part of her, the part that had been hurt too many times, held her back. Finally, Alexander looked up. His eyes were wet, but no tears had fallen. The threat is real, Eleanor. The assassination plot. Lord Ashford was not lying to you. I know, Eleanor said. She had spent the last 3 days thinking about it, analyzing every word, every gesture. But that is not why you ordered the lockdown, is it? At least not the only reason. Alexander's silence was all the confirmation she needed. You wanted to keep me here, Eleanor continued. You found out about my plans to leave and you used this security crisis as an excuse to trap me. To buy yourself time to change my mind. Can you blame me? Alexander stood suddenly, his voice rising again. You are my wife. I love you. I know I have made mistakes, but I cannot lose you. I will not lose you. You do not have me to lose. Eleanor shouted back, her own anger finally breaking free. I stopped being yours the moment you stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as property. As another asset to manage like the treasury or the military. That is not fair, Alexander protested. None of this is fair. Eleanor's voice cracked with emotion. It was not fair that I gave up my career to become your queen. It was not fair that I spent years being criticized by the press while you stood by and said nothing. It was not fair that I lost myself trying to be the perfect wife while you criticized every little thing I did. Alexander opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, there was a loud crash from somewhere in the palace. Both of them froze, looking toward the door. Shouting erupted in the corridors, followed by the sound of running feet. Captain Thornton burst through the door, his face pale. Your Majesty, Your Highness, we have a situation. One of the conspirators has been identified. He is a palace guard, and he has taken a hostage. Eleanor felt her blood turn to ice. Who is the hostage? Captain Thornton's eyes flickered with concern. Lady Margaret, your niece. She was in the West Wing library when he grabbed her. He is demanding safe passage out of the palace, and he says if we do not comply within the hour, he will kill her. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. Margaret was only 19 years old, her sister's daughter who had come to visit the palace 2 weeks ago. A sweet, innocent girl who had nothing to do with any of this. Where is he? Alexander demanded, all traces of their personal conflict forgotten. He was suddenly the king again, commanding and decisive. What are his exact demands? He is in the East Tower, Captain Thornton reported. He wants a car brought to the rear entrance, no guards following, and $1 million in cash. He gave us 60 minutes, Alexander turned to Eleanor. Go to the safe room, now. We do not know if he has accomplices, but Eleanor shook her head. Margaret is my niece. I am not hiding while her life is in danger. Eleanor, please No, she said firmly. For once in our marriage, do not tell me what to do. I am going to help save that girl. She pushed past Alexander and Captain Thornton, walking quickly toward the door. Behind her, she heard Alexander curse under his breath, then the sound of his footsteps following her. Fine, he called after her, but you do not leave my sight. Do you understand? Eleanor did not answer. She was already thinking about Margaret, about the fear the young girl must be feeling. She thought about the guard who had grabbed her suitcase just days ago, about all the guards in the palace. Which one of them was the traitor? Which one had betrayed the trust of everyone who lived here? As they rushed through the corridors toward the East Tower, Eleanor realized something that made her stomach turn. This crisis, as terrible as it was, might be her only chance to escape. In the chaos and confusion, security would be focused elsewhere. If she was clever, if she was quick, she might be able to slip away. But then she thought of Margaret's frightened face, of her sister who would be destroyed if anything happened to her daughter. She thought of all the innocent people in the palace who deserved protection. Eleanor made her decision. She would help save Margaret first. Her escape would have to wait, but it would happen. One way or another, she would find her freedom, even if she had to fight through an army of guards to get it. The East Tower had been built 300 years ago as a defensive structure, with thick stone walls and narrow windows. Now it served as a storage area for old palace records and artifacts. Eleanor had only been there once years ago, when she was still curious about the palace's history. When they arrived, a dozen guards were already positioned outside the heavy wooden door that led to the tower staircase. Lord Ashford was there too, speaking urgently into a radio. He looked up as Eleanor and Alexander approached, his expression grave. "Your Majesty, Your Highness," he began, but Alexander cut him off. "Give me the situation." "Everything you know," Lord Ashford nodded crisply. "The hostage-taker is Guard Corporal David Preston. He has been with the Royal Guard for 8 years. No previous incidents, excellent service record. We had no reason to suspect him. He took Lady Margaret from the library approximately 20 minutes ago. He is now barricaded on the 3rd floor of the tower with her." "What does he want?" Eleanor asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Safe passage and money," as Captain Thornton reported. "But our negotiator has been trying to establish communication, and Preston keeps changing his demands. First he wanted a car, then a helicopter. Now he is asking for immunity from prosecution. He is erratic, possibly unstable." Eleanor felt sick. An unstable man with a hostage was far more dangerous than a calculated criminal. "Is Margaret hurt? Has he harmed her?" "We do not know," Lord Ashford admitted. "He allowed her to call out once to prove she was alive, but that was 15 minutes ago. Since then, silence." Alexander paced back and forth, his mind clearly racing through options. Eleanor watched him, seeing the strategist, the leader that she had fallen in love with so many years ago. In moments of crisis, he was magnificent. It was only in the quiet moments of everyday life that he failed to connect. "I want to talk to him," Eleanor said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. Alexander's face darkened. "Absolutely not. It is too dangerous. He wants money and freedom," Eleanor continued, ignoring her husband's objection. "But more than that, he wants to feel powerful. He wants to be heard. Let me speak with him, woman to man, aunt to someone who holds her niece's life in his hands, not as the queen consort, but as a human being." "Eleanor, no," Alexander said firmly. "I forbid it." Something inside Eleanor snapped. She turned to face him, her eyes blazing. "You forbid it? Alexander, you do not get to forbid me from doing anything anymore. I am going to speak to this man, and you cannot stop me." "Your Majesty," Captain Thornton interjected carefully. "Perhaps Lady Eleanor has a point. Our trained negotiator is making no progress. A different approach might work. If Preston sees Lady Eleanor, sees her concern for her niece, it might humanize the situation for him." Lord Ashford looked thoughtful. "It is risky, but we are running out of time. We have 35 minutes left before his deadline." Alexander looked at Eleanor for a long moment. She could see the war raging behind his eyes, the desire to protect her battling against the recognition that she might be right. Finally, he spoke. "If you do this, I am coming with you. We face him together." Eleanor wanted to argue, but she saw the determination in his face. For the first time in years, they would stand united in something. She nodded. "Together." Captain Thornton quickly briefed them on protocol. They would approach the door slowly, hands visible, no weapons. They would announce themselves clearly. Under no circumstances would they try to enter the room or make any sudden movements. 2 snipers would be positioned at distant windows, but only as a last resort. Eleanor's heart hammered as they climbed the narrow spiral staircase of the tower. Alexander was directly behind her, his hand occasionally touching her back, whether to steady her or himself she could not tell. The stone walls felt cold, oppressive. She thought about young Margaret, terrified and alone with a desperate man. When they reached the 3rd floor landing, Eleanor could see the door ahead, closed and barricaded from the inside. She could hear sounds from within. Footsteps, muffled crying, a man's voice speaking harshly. Eleanor took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Corporal Preston? My name is Lady Eleanor. I am Margaret's aunt. I would like to speak with you." There was sudden silence from within the room. Then a man's voice, tight with tension. "Stay back. I will hurt her if you come closer." "I am not coming closer," Eleanor called out, keeping her voice calm and gentle. "I'm standing right here, several feet from the door. I just want to talk. I want to understand what is happening." "You do not care about understanding," Preston shouted. "None of you care. You sit in your palace living in luxury, while people like me serve and suffer and get nothing in return." Eleanor exchanged a glance with Alexander. The man's anger was palpable, years of resentment pouring out. This was about more than just the assassination plot. "You are right," Eleanor said, surprising everyone, including herself. "You are absolutely right. I have lived in privilege. I have had things that most people can only dream about. But I also know what it feels like to be trapped, to feel like your life is not your own. I know what it is like to be powerless." There was a pause. Then Preston's voice came again, slightly less hostile. "What do you know about being powerless? You are the queen consort." "A title that means nothing," Eleanor replied honestly. "I am a symbol, a figurehead. I smile and wave and attend ceremonies, but I have no real power. No real voice. And for years I thought that was just my fate, that I had to accept it. But recently I realized something. We always have a choice. We can choose how we respond to our circumstances." "Easy for you to say," Preston shot back. "You can choose to walk away from your problems. I cannot walk away from mine. I have debts, family obligations, a sick mother who needs expensive medical care. The palace pays me barely enough to survive. So when someone offered me money to help with a plan, I took it. I had no choice." Eleanor felt a surge of compassion mixed with fear. This man was not evil. He was desperate. And desperate people were unpredictable. "I understand," she said softly. "And I am truly sorry that you were put in such an impossible position. But David, now may I call you David? Oh, you are making this worse. Margaret has nothing to do with any of this. She is innocent. She is just a girl who came to visit her family. Please let her go. If I let her go, they will kill me." Preston's voice rose in panic. "The people who hired me, they said if I get caught, if I talk, they will kill me and my entire family. I am dead either way." Alexander stepped forward, joining Eleanor at the door. "Corporal Preston, this is King Alexander. I am giving you my personal word that if you release Lady Margaret unharmed, I will protect you and your family. We will relocate you somewhere safe, somewhere the conspirators cannot find you, and we will make sure your mother receives the medical care she needs." "Why should I trust you?" Preston asked, but there was a note of hope in his voice now. "Why should I trust any of you? Because unlike the people who manipulated you into this situation, we actually care about human life," Alexander replied. "We care about you, about your mother, about Margaret. We want everyone to walk out of this safely, including you." Eleanor could hear muffled sobbing from inside the room. Margaret. The poor girl must be terrified. Eleanor pressed her hand against the door as if she could somehow comfort her niece through the thick wood. "Please, David," she said, her voice breaking. "I know you did not want any of this. I know you are not a bad person. You made a mistake out of desperation. We all make mistakes. But it is not too late to make the right choice now. Let Margaret go. Let us help you." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Eleanor held her breath, praying, hoping. Behind her, she could feel the tension radiating from Alexander and Captain Thornton. Everyone waiting for Preston's response. Finally, they heard the sound of furniture being moved, the barricade being dismantled. The door handle turned slowly. Eleanor stepped back instinctively, and Alexander moved partially in front of her, protective even now. The door opened a crack. Preston's face appeared, pale and drawn, his eyes red from crying. He was younger than Eleanor expected, probably in his late 20s. In his hand he held a gun, but it was pointed at the floor, not at them. "I want to see the king's promise in writing," he said, his voice shaking. "I want it witnessed and official. Then I will let the girl go." "You have my word," Alexander said firmly. "Lord Ashford will draw up the document immediately. You will have it within 10 minutes. Preston nodded slowly. Through the gap in the door, Eleanor could see Margaret huddled in the corner of the room, her face streaked with tears but apparently unharmed. Relief flooded through Eleanor, making her legs weak. "Margaret, sweetheart," Eleanor called softly. "Hold on just a little longer. You are going to be okay." The young girl looked up at the sound of her aunt's voice, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. But she managed a small nod. Lord Ashford was already on his radio, ordering someone to prepare the document. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Eleanor remained at the door, talking quietly to Preston, keeping him calm, keeping him engaged. She told him about her own struggles, her own feelings of helplessness. She spoke honestly, vulnerably, in a way she had not spoken to anyone in years, and somehow impossibly, a connection formed. Two people trapped by circumstances beyond their control. The document arrived 7 minutes later, brought by a breathless assistant who handed it directly to King Alexander. Alexander read through it quickly, then held it up to the crack in the door so Preston could see it. "Everything you asked for is here," Alexander said. "Full immunity from prosecution in exchange for your cooperation in identifying the other conspirators. Protected relocation for you and your family, medical care for your mother at the Royal Hospital for as long as she needs it, and a pension to ensure you can live comfortably. It is signed by me and witnessed by Lord Ashford and Captain Thornton." Preston read the document carefully through the gap, his eyes moving over each line. Eleanor watched his face, seeing the conflict there, the war between hope and fear. Finally, he looked up. "How do I know this is real? How do I know you will not just throw me in prison the moment I surrender?" "You have my word as king," Alexander said solemnly. "And more than that, you have my word as a man. I do not break my promises." Eleanor added quietly, "I will personally ensure that these terms are honored, David. You have helped me see something important today. You have reminded me that behind every guard, every servant, every person in this palace, there is a human being with struggles and pain and dreams. I will not let you be betrayed. I promise you that." Something in Eleanor's voice seemed to reach Preston. He looked at her for a long moment, then slowly lowered his gun to the floor and pushed it through the gap in the door. Captain Thornton immediately secured it. "Okay," Preston said, his voice barely a whisper. "Okay, I'm letting her go." He opened the door wider. Margaret stumbled out, sobbing, and Eleanor caught her, wrapping her arms around her niece and holding her tight. The girl shook violently, her face buried in Eleanor's shoulder. Alexander placed a protective hand on both of them, guiding them away from the door. "Get her to the medical wing," Alexander instructed Captain Thornton. "Full examination and someone stays with her at all times. She should not be alone." But Margaret clung to Eleanor, refusing to let go. "Please, Aunt Eleanor, do not leave me." "I am not going anywhere," Eleanor murmured, smoothing her niece's hair. "I am right here. You are safe now." Behind them, guards moved in to secure Preston. Eleanor turned to watch, still holding Margaret. She expected to see them rough with him, angry after the fear and chaos he had caused. But to her surprise, they were gentle, almost respectful. Captain Thornton himself placed the handcuffs on Preston's wrists, speaking to him in a low, calm voice. "You did the right thing in the end," the captain said. "That took courage." Preston looked up at Eleanor one last time as they led him away. "Thank you," he mouthed silently. Eleanor nodded, acknowledging him. Then he was gone, escorted down the spiral staircase, and the crisis was over. The walk back through the palace felt surreal. Eleanor kept one arm around Margaret, who refused to let go of her. Alexander walked on Margaret's other side, occasionally glancing at Eleanor with an expression she could not quite read. Was it respect, admiration, or something else entirely? When they reached the medical wing, Margaret finally agreed to be examined, but only if Eleanor stayed in the room. Eleanor sat beside the bed, holding her niece's hand while the doctor checked her over. Physically, Margaret was fine. Emotionally, it would take time to heal. "I was so scared," Margaret whispered after the doctor left. "I thought I was going to die. I thought I would never see my mother again, never see you again." "I know, sweetheart," Eleanor said softly, "but you were so brave. You survived." "I survived because of you," Margaret insisted. "I heard your voice outside that door, and I knew you were fighting for me." "You did not give up." Eleanor felt tears prickling her eyes. When had someone last told her that she mattered? That something she did made a real difference. Alexander appeared in the doorway. "Margaret's mother is on her way. She will be here within the hour. Until then, Margaret, you should rest. You have been through a terrible ordeal." Margaret nodded sleepily. The doctor had given her something mild to help her calm down, and it was clearly taking effect. Within minutes, she was asleep, her hand still holding Eleanor's. Eleanor gently extracted her hand and stood up. Her whole body ached with exhaustion. She had been running on adrenaline for hours, and now that the crisis was over, she felt herself crashing. Alexander was waiting in the corridor, When Eleanor stepped out of the room, he immediately moved closer. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "I am fine," Eleanor said automatically, but even as she spoke, she felt herself swaying. Alexander caught her arm, steadying her. "You are not fine," he said. "Come with me. You need to sit down." He guided her to a small private waiting room nearby. Eleanor sank into a chair and Alexander knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. They were still cold, she realized. Cold and shaking. "What you did today," Alexander began, his voice thick with emotion. "Eleanor, I have never been more proud of you. You saved that girl's life. You saved Preston's life too, probably. If you had not intervened, if you had not spoken to him the way you did, Captain Thornton would have eventually ordered his men to storm that room. People would have died." Eleanor looked at their joined hands. How long had it been since they had held hands like this? Years, probably. "I just did what felt right." "No," Alexander said firmly. "You did what was brave and compassionate and wise. You did what I could not do. I was ready to use force, to treat it as a military operation. But you saw the human element. You understood that Preston was not a monster, just a desperate man who made bad choices." Eleanor finally met his eyes. "That is because I understand what it feels like to be desperate. To feel like you have no good options, only terrible ones and slightly less terrible ones." The meaning behind her words was clear. Alexander's face tightened with pain. "I have made you feel that way. I have made you desperate enough to want to leave." "Yes," Eleanor said simply. There was no point in denying it anymore. "I am so sorry," Alexander whispered. "Eleanor, I am so sorry for everything. You were right about all of it. I did treat you like property. I did dismiss your opinions. I did choose duty over love over and over again until there was no love left." Eleanor felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "Alexander, I cannot do this anymore. I cannot keep pretending. Today showed me something. When I was talking to Preston, when I was being honest about my own struggles, I felt more like myself than I have in years. I cannot go back to being the perfect silent queen consort who never complains and never causes trouble." "Then do not go back," Alexander said urgently. "Be yourself, be honest. Because all the trouble you want, I would rather have you here fighting with me, disagreeing with me, challenging me than not have you at all." "It is not that simple," Eleanor protested. "The palace, the protocols, the expectations, they do not change just because we want them to." "Then we will change them," Alexander insisted. "We will rewrite the rules. Eleanor, I know I cannot undo the damage I have caused. I know I cannot erase years of hurt with a few words. But please, give me a chance to try. Give us a chance to find our way back to each other." Eleanor wanted to believe him. Oh, how she wanted to believe. But she had been disappointed too many times before. "I do not know if I can trust you again." "I know," Alexander said. "And I understand. But I am asking you, please do not leave, not yet. Stay and let me prove to you that I can change. That we can change." Eleanor closed her eyes, exhausted and overwhelmed. The events of the day had shaken everything inside her. All the certainty she had built up about leaving, about starting over somewhere else. What if Alexander really could change? What if they really could build something better together? But what if he could not? What if this was just another manipulation? Another way to keep her trapped? "I need time," she finally said. "I need time to think, to figure out what I really want." "Take all the time you need," Alexander said. "I will wait. For however long it takes, I will wait." He stood slowly, still holding her hands, and pulled her to her feet. For a moment they stood facing each other, closer than they had been in months. Eleanor could smell his cologne, familiar and comforting. She could see the silver threads in his hair that had not been there when they married. They had both aged, both changed. The question was whether they had changed too much to find each other again. "The lockdown will end tomorrow," Alexander said quietly. "Preston is cooperating fully with the investigation. He has given us names, locations, everything we need to arrest the other conspirators. Once that is done, you will be free to leave if you choose to. I will not stop you." Eleanor nodded, understanding the gift he was giving her. Freedom. The choice to stay or go would be entirely hers. As Alexander left the room, Eleanor sank back into the chair, her mind spinning. Tomorrow she could leave. She could walk out those palace doors and never look back. It was everything she had wanted just days ago. So why did the thought of leaving now make her heart ache with uncertainty? Eleanor did not sleep that night. She stood at the window of her chambers, watching the sun rise over the palace gardens, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The lockdown had officially ended an hour ago. The palace gates were open. She was free to leave. Martha had packed her suitcase again, the same one that Captain Thornton had grabbed from her hand 6 days earlier. It sat by the door, waiting, but Eleanor had not moved toward it. "My lady," Martha said softly from across the room, "the car's ready whenever you want it." "The driver is waiting." Eleanor turned from the window. Martha looked at her with wise, knowing eyes. The old woman had served her for 15 years, had seen every high and every low, every moment of joy and every tear of frustration. "Martha, what should I do?" Eleanor asked, her voice small and uncertain. Martha came to stand beside her, looking out at the same sunrise. "That is not a question I can answer for you, my dear. Only you know what your heart truly needs." "I do not know what my heart needs anymore," Eleanor admitted. "I was so certain before. I had my bags packed, my plans made. I was ready to walk away from everything. But now you have seen a different side of things," Martha finished gently. "You have seen the king vulnerable and apologetic. You have seen yourself being strong and capable in ways you forgot you could be. You have remembered that love, even damaged love, is not always simple to leave behind." Eleanor wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "I am afraid, Martha. I am afraid that if I stay, nothing will really change, that we will fall back into the same patterns, the same hurts. But I am also afraid that if I leave, I will spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been if I had given him one more chance." "Fear is not a good reason to stay or to go," Martha said wisely. "You must choose based on what you truly want, not what you fear." Before Eleanor could respond, there was a gentle knock at the door. Martha moved to answer it, and Eleanor was surprised to see Lord Ashford standing there, looking unusually nervous. "Your Majesty," he said with a bow, "forgive the early intrusion. The king has asked me to deliver something to you. He says there is no pressure, no expectation, but he wanted you to have this before you made your decision." He handed Eleanor a sealed envelope, then bowed again and left. Eleanor stared at the envelope, recognizing Alexander's handwriting on the front. With shaking hands, she opened it and pulled out several pages of paper. It was not a letter. It was a legal document. Eleanor scanned the pages, her eyes widening with each line. It was a complete restructuring of her role within the monarchy. No longer would she be just a ceremonial figure. She would have real authority, real responsibilities. She would sit on the council, have a vote in major decisions, oversee important initiatives. There would be a budget under her direct control, which she could use for causes she believed in. But more than the practical details, what caught Eleanor's breath was the note attached to the front in Alexander's own hand. "Eleanor, I know I cannot ask you to trust words anymore. So here are actions. Here is proof that I am serious about change. Whether you stay or go, these reforms will happen. The role of queen consort will never again be reduced to smiling and waving. But I hope you will stay and be the one to define what it should be. I hope you will stay and teach me how to be a better partner, a better king, a better man. I love you. I always have. I just forgot how to show it. Please give me the chance to remember. Alexander?" Eleanor read the note 3 times, tears streaming freely now. This was not empty promises or emotional manipulation. This was real change, documented and official. He had given her power. Not just the freedom to leave, but the power to stay and actually make a difference. She looked at Martha, who was watching her with gentle expectation. "He really means it," Eleanor whispered. "He's really trying to change." "So the question is," Martha said quietly, "are you willing to try too?" Eleanor folded the papers carefully and held them close to her chest. She thought about the past 15 years, all the disappointments and frustrations. But she also thought about the first time she had met Alexander, how his eyes had lit up when he laughed, how passionate he had been about making his kingdom better. That man was still in there somewhere. She had seen glimpses of him during the crisis with Margaret, and she thought about herself, about the woman she had been when she first arrived at the palace, full of ideas and energy. That woman was still inside her too. She had proven it when she saved Margaret, when she spoke to Preston with compassion and wisdom. Maybe she did not need to leave the palace to find herself again. Maybe she just needed to stop hiding. Eleanor walked to the suitcase by the door. Martha watched silently as Eleanor picked it up, and for a moment the old woman's face fell, thinking Eleanor had made her choice to leave. But then Eleanor carried the suitcase to the closet and placed it inside, closing the door firmly. "I am staying," Eleanor said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "But I am not staying as the woman I was. I am staying as the woman I am going to become." Martha's face broke into a wide smile. "Oh, my dear girl, I am so glad." Eleanor moved to her desk and pulled out a piece of paper. She began writing, her hand moving quickly across the page. It was a list of changes she wanted to make, initiatives she wanted to start, reforms she wanted to implement. For the first time in years, she felt excited about the future. An hour later, Eleanor walked through the palace corridors, the legal documents and her own list clutched in her hands. Servants and guards watched her pass, noting something different about her bearing. She walked taller now, with purpose and confidence. She found Alexander in his private study, sitting at his desk, staring at nothing. He looked like he had not slept either. When he heard the door open and saw Eleanor standing there, he stood immediately, his face a mixture of hope and fear. "I am staying," Eleanor said simply. Alexander's eyes filled with tears. He took a step toward her, then stopped, as if unsure if he was allowed to come closer. Eleanor made the decision for him. She crossed the room and placed her list on his desk. "But things are going to be different," she continued. "I have my own conditions, my own list of changes I want to see. Not just in how the monarchy operates, but in how we operate as a couple. We need counseling, Alexander, real professional help, to work through all the damage we have done to each other. And we need to learn how to communicate again, how to be honest with each other even when it is difficult." "Yes," Alexander said immediately. "Anything, everything, whatever you need." "I need you to see me," Eleanor said, her voice cracking with emotion. "Really see me. Not as the queen consort, not as the woman in the photographs, but as Eleanor, the real me with all my flaws and fears and dreams. Can you do that?" Alexander closed the distance between them and took her face in his hands, looking into her eyes with an intensity that took her breath away. "I see you, Eleanor. I'm sorry it took me so long, but I see you now. And I will spend every day for the rest of my life, making sure you know how much you matter to me, how much I need you not as my queen, but as my partner and my equal." He kissed her then, and Eleanor kissed him back, tasting salt from both their tears. It was not a passionate kiss, not the kiss of young lovers. It was something deeper, something harder won. It was the kiss of two people who had lost each other and found their way back, battered and bruised but still willing to try. When they finally pulled apart, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for giving me another chance. Thank you for giving me reasons to stay," Eleanor replied. "Thank you for finally seeing that I needed more than just comfort and luxury. I needed purpose. I needed to matter." "You have always mattered," Alexander whispered. "I just failed to show you that." They stood together in the quiet study, holding each other, both knowing that the road ahead would not be easy. Years of hurt could not be healed overnight. Trust would have to be rebuilt slowly, carefully. There would be setbacks and arguments and moments of doubt. But for the first time in a very long time, Eleanor felt hope. Real, genuine hope. Not the desperate hope of escape, but the stronger hope of transformation. She was not leaving the palace, but she was leaving behind the woman she had been, the silent, suffering woman who had forgotten her own worth. That evening, as Eleanor and Alexander walked through the palace gardens together, truly together for the first time in years, she thought about the suitcase that Captain Thornton had grabbed from her hands. At the time, it had felt like the end of her freedom. But now she understood it differently. Sometimes freedom was not about leaving. Sometimes freedom was about finding the courage to stay and fight for change. Sometimes the bravest thing you could do was not to run away, but to stand your ground and demand better. Not just for yourself, but for everyone around you. Eleanor looked up at the palace, at the building that had been her prison for so long. It looked different now in the fading light, less imposing, less oppressive. It was just a building, after all. Stone and glass and history. What mattered was what happened inside it, the choices people made, the love they chose to give or withhold. She had chosen to stay. But more importantly, she had chosen to stop being invisible. She had chosen to use her voice to claim her power, to become the woman she was always meant to be.